What's up, guys? Hello to Footballtalk here. We are back a couple of weeks after the draft got wrapped up. I've put out a big recap of my biggest winners, losers, steals and reaches from the NFL draft, along with some of my favorite fits for undrafted free agents and the names to keep an eye on. You can check those out over on my page hellotofootballtalk.com, along with my positional draft rankings and extensive scouting reports to really study up on the newest members of your favorite teams. But now it's time to get to our divisional draft and roster review series, where I want to focus on the draft classes of all 32 teams for the time, talk about the players selected, the state of those rosters in correlation with that, and share my thoughts on what everybody was able to accomplish. I watched about 340 prospects for this draft, and I can proudly say that I had done evals on every single non-specialist, since I don't watch those, through rounds 1 to 5. Of course, the very first name from the 6 I didn't get to, but I think altogether it was exactly 20 guys that I didn't watch throughout those 2 final rounds, so definitely not a bad hit rate. Just to make it clear that there'll be 2 to 4 guys in each of these videos that I only had the measurables on or some quick hitters. But otherwise, I'm very familiar with everybody from this class, and I've also familiarized myself yet again with all 32 rosters and how all the players selected fit within the overall picture. So while I will give some quick scouting reports on every one of these names I did watch, I also want to project what I see their role to be with the new team, and then at the end of each of these, share my thoughts on a draft haul as a whole. Then at the end of these videos, I do a quick ranking of the classes. I don't love handing out letter grades, but just how I would stack them in terms of talent acquired and the vision behind those in relation to the draft capital that they had in the first place. We'll switch back and forth between conferences, moving around the compass, north to west. Let's get into it now, starting things off with the NFC North. And going by alphabet, the first team here is the Chicago Bears. And before we even get to any of the actual selections that they made, General Manager Ryan Poles gave himself plenty of shots at this when he traded that first overall pick to Carolina for picks 9 and 62 this year, along with a first and second rounder next year, and of course Pro Bowl level wide receiver DJ Moore. Let me quickly run you through the selections that they did make. First round, 10th overall, Daniel Wright, offensive tackle, Tennessee. 2 second rounders, 53rd overall, Jordan Dexter, interior defensive lineman out of Florida, and 3 picks later, Tyreek Stevenson, the cornerback out of Miami. Top of the 3rd round, 64th overall, Zach Pickens, the interior defensive lineman out of South Carolina. 4th round, 2 more picks, 115th overall, Roschon Johnson, running back Texas, and 133rd overall, Tyler Scott, the wide receiver out of Cincinnati. 2 5th rounders, Noah Sewell, the linebacker out of Oregon, 148th overall, and 165th overall, Terrell Smith, the cornerback out of Minnesota, plus 2 more 7th rounders, 218th overall, Travis Bell, interior defensive lineman out of Kennesaw State, and 258th overall, so the second to last pick, Kendall Williams, the safety out of Stanford. The Bears got back another 4th rounder next year from the Eagles to move back 1 spot from 9 to 10, yet they still got what probably is the most pro-ready right tackle, at least, in Daniel Wright from Tennessee. The number 2 offensive tackle recruit in 2019, behind only now Giants right tackle Evan Neal. Wright played on the left side in 21, before coming back to right tackle last season, when he was one of the most consistent players in the country. Just exudes power, where if he catches somebody off balance, he will just bury them into the ground. You don't always see him play up to that Tennessee, because of the offense that they run, where it's a ton of RPOs, and basically one side of the field being irrelevant almost at times. But in a more wide zone-based attack, him actually sustaining blocks and creating lateral displacement should be fun, and then his pass sets are well refined, tremendous take-on strength, which he showcased against third overall pick Will Anderson Jr. from Alabama, for example, but also having the agility to match guys more reliant on quickness. His weight gets a little too far out in front in run plays and back in passing situations, but those are minor things to fix. He should start day 1, and now Chicago bringing in our guard Nate Davis on a solid deal from Tennessee. What Braxton Jones showed as a 5th round rookie at left tackle last year, some of those young guys that they have already, now moving to 2nd string, I believe this offensive line will be a lot better in 2023. Unfortunately, one of the 2 second round picks was my least favorite move of the entire draft probably. I know I'm a lot lower than consensus on Jordan Dexter, but I just don't see it. He's a former big time recruit, the athletic testing is excellent, and what it does certainly have is an uncanny ability to just hold his ground in the run game. So if they just want to pack 20 pounds on him and make him a full-time nose tackle on early downs, that's fine, but I'm not sure that's worth such draft capital to be invested into. Some of it had to do with what he was taught to do, I'm sure, sitting back in his conservative 4-point stance and reading what's happening, but just lacked any type of urgency to beat blockers to the spot, disengage from them in order to make plays, and then as a pass rusher, little to no plan or arsenal that he can access. I don't want to be mean here, but this was the least inspiring play I watched on tape this year, and he was like interior defensive lineman 20 for me. The other second rounder Chicago made I was a much bigger fan of. Tyreek Stevenson was my number 9 corner, and really had I had the medical records on one of the guys that I had in front of him, that would have actually bumped him up one more spot. 6 foot even and 200 pounds, with a stout build and 32.5-inch arms, a press specialist who can alter his hand usage to throw receivers off kilter, incorporate fake jams, but also has enough speed to ride guys into the sideline and not worry too much about getting run by. Has experience and good feel in off zone for the space that he has to manage. Stevenson went to the Senior Bowl and put on a clinic for the first 2 days, before missing one practice with an injury, and ultimately returning for the game, which is also a sign of his competitive spirit. He doesn't have the greatest makeup burst, but he does allow some separation and then tends to grab cloth. Plus he has to become a better wrap-up tackler, but I love his fit alongside Jalen Johnson as 2 physical outside corners. Now he's like Kyler Gordon, an early second round from last year, into the slot. Matt Eberflus can get back to his roots of press bail cover 3, has the bodies now to trust him in man, and be versatile on a weekly basis with the stuff that he do on the back end. Then they go with another defensive tackle at the top of the 3rd round, but almost the polar opposite in terms of skill set to Dexter, with Zach Pickens, who is much more of your typical free technique, somebody who has juice up the field to win the gap and be a disruptor, with great lateral agility and enough force to crash through one shoulder of the blocker, has the power to work into the depth of the pocket, but it's linking his upper and lower half together in order to tightly navigate around blockers, which really stands out. Plus, then he's tough to throw the ball over his head, because he regularly puts those big paws up and towers over quarterbacks. His issues are more so keeping his frame clean and being able to anchor in the run game. You watch the Arkansas tape and he just constantly gets moved off his landmarks, while in the pass game there are just way too many chest-to-chest reps. I'm guessing the Bears look at this as the new future of the interior defensive line, since until now they had Andrew Billings and Justin Jones slated to start at the 1 and 3 for them as an even front-based team. Still a little early for me, but I can get on board with this more so because at least I see the athletic profile flash on film. Then they come back on day 3 and pick up one of my favorite running backs in this class, Roschon Johnson from Texas. Certainly overshadowed by Bijan Robinson with the Longhorns, but looking at some of the efficiency metrics, right on par with the starter there, has some more size to him at 6'1", 225 pounds, very mature runner who stays true to his concepts and makes his blockers look good, but also light feet for a bigger back, being able to manage tight turns as he rolls off the outside foot and make decisions on the fly. Better burst out to the corner than you'd expect, and then once he gets to the open field, he can plow through arm tackles and has enough speed to rip off chunk plays. Not like game-breaking ability, but good enough. He does present a larger surface area to hit for defenders, and the real question will be his role in passing downs, not catching more than 14 passes since his freshman season, and dropping 5 of 61 catchable targets for his career. Chicago did sign Deontay Foreman to replace David Montgomery, and Khalil Herbert should have an expanded role this year, but this guy has a chance to be the most talented back of the group. He'll start as the number 2 in the depth chart, I guess, but could see more run as the season progresses, and I would not be shocked if he started at some point. Later in the 4th, they get Tyler Scott, who surprisingly was only the 2nd wide receiver selected from Cincinnati after Trey Tucker went at the end of day 2. Just easy acceleration of the line and gets to full throttle in a hurry. Only around 180 pounds, but played almost exclusively out wide, with a bunch of vertical stems and then creating separation when snapping off hitches or curl routes. Displays outstanding focus on those over-the-shoulder catches, but can also elevate and haul in challenging high-point grabs versus contact. And if he can catch it or you pop pass it to him, that speed to burn pursuit angles will be a problem at the NFL level too. Definitely lacks some refinement to his route running and that ability to manipulate defenders one-on-one. And then he dropped 7 of 62 catchable targets this past season, particularly when the ball was slightly behind him. This is much more appropriate in my opinion than what he was projected to be, potentially going in the mid-day 2. And at worst, he should be a space creator due to the threat of him stretching defenses down the field when you get into those 3 and 4 wide receiver sets, as that crew now looks totally different with DJ Moore, and depending on what he can get out of Chase Claypool after an offseason to acclimate himself to the offense, along with Darnell Mooney returning from injury. Noah Sewell is another guy that I really struggled with. Once again, 5th round, much more fitting for what I think he is, because his ability to ID plays, not be a step behind consistently, was a glaring issue on his tape. He's a great athlete and has legit mic size in a very small linebacker class, but he doesn't play very fast, and he can't fully unlock the power in him against blockers. What he is really good at is rushing the passer, where if you put him on the edge, you see a legit burst of the ball, and an ability to either corner his rushes or shorten the arc with speed to power. Maybe he can be a much lesser version of what Micah Parsons was as a rookie, in terms of playing stack backer on early downs, and then move down to the edge in passing situations, because I don't see him being an asset in coverage. With Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards being signed alongside Jack Sanborn for Chicago, this to me is a special teamer with some rush value as a rookie at least, and we'll see if the light comes on for him at some point. Terrell Smith, on the other hand, I think is a much more beneficial selection, because I thought he had a chance to go late day 2, and to get him here late in the 6th round. Size speed combo is tremendous, packs some real shock in his hands, being able to disrupt and take receivers off track frequently, while also having nimble feet to slide in front of them, not scared of guys running by him, playing trail technique, and then having those long arms to break up back shoulder fades, willing in run support, not shying away from mixing up with bigger bodies, and then he's a forceful tackler. He doesn't look nearly as comfortable playing off though, and there's some lacking conviction in zone when he doesn't end up getting matched up with somebody directly, plus then he has very limited ball production to speak of, but I think to get him here late as a backup for those outside corners is tremendous. And then unfortunately I didn't have any Kennesaw State tape to watch Travis Bell, although I am aware that he's an intriguing athlete. Well, I only watched Kai Blue Kelly in particular for that Stanford defense, but I know Kendall Williams has got good size and athleticism, and from watching him on the side, he's an urgent run defender, although he can get a little overzealous with his angles and tackling. So altogether, I do see the vision here mostly, but I don't love some of the players that they picked individually, and for how much draft capital they had to work with, I think they could have done better. Right locking at right tackle for Decker potentially is awesome. I look at Stevenson as a quality starting outside corner in a more press-heavy approach. They bet on athleticism at defensive tackle, but I thought reached on both those guys before a much more solid day 3. So it's really that middle portion that I disagree with. I think Rosham can be a starting back in this league, and is a name to track throughout the season for what should be one of the top rushing attacks, depending on how much you want to involve Justin Fields in that. So watch out for him in your fantasy drafts, especially in dynasty formats. But with DJ Moore now too, I think they have the protection and weapons to see exactly what they have in their young quarterback, while the defense is still going to be a bit of a work in progress. The second team up now is the Detroit Lions, who first round they had 2 picks, 12th overall Jahmyr Gibbs, running back Alabama, and 18th overall Jack Campbell, linebacker Iowa, 2 second rounders, 34th overall Sam Laporta, tight end Iowa, and 45th overall Brian Branch, the safety out of Alabama. Then 2 third rounders, 68th overall Hendon Hooker, quarterback Tennessee, and 96th overall Broderick Martin, interior defensive lineman out of Western Kentucky. 1 5th rounder, 152nd overall Colby Sorsdal, offensive tackle William Mary, and 7th round, 219th overall Antoine Green, wide receiver North Carolina. And let's just be honest here, I think they got blindsided by the Seahawks, taking Illinois cornerback DeJuan Witherspoon at pick number 5, who many believed was the apple of the eye, and who they felt comfortable trading away another highly drafted cornerback from 3 years ago in Jeffrey Okudah for. So instead they allowed the Cardinals to move back up to 6 after the blockbuster deal with Houston, and Detroit moved back 6 spots in exchange for swapping picks 34 and 81, along with a 5th rounder they got in return, before a 12th overall, probably the most shocking pick of the first round, in Jahmyr Gibbs. Of course what they did 6 spots later was up there for the second biggest shock, I would say at least. As for Gibbs, I do understand why there were rumors out there that he might have been a top 20 pick anyway. He was my clear-cut RB2, and he actually has more home run ability than Bijan Robinson. Of course he's about 15 pounds less at right around 200, but his ability to accelerate and decelerate almost effortlessly, it seems like, is pretty special. He's a much better in-between the tackles runner than he gets credit for, with that ability to manipulate second-level defenders, and the quickness to navigate around blockers in order to make defenders be wrong really stands out. Of course he also brings a ton of value as a receiver, where he was the leader in catches for the Crimson Tide last season. He's a nightmare matchup for any linebacker on option or angle routes, but you can legitimately split him out wide and ask him to run a more complex route tree. Since people somehow always seem to compare him to Alvin Kamara, probably mostly based on his hair and elbow tape, he doesn't really have that type of contact balance. He gets a little too cute with trying to make somebody miss, and you're not going to lock him into the backfield with those type of protection skills that he shows. Detroit traded away DeAndre Swift soon after, having already signed David Montgomery, so that's an improvement for that two-headed monster in the backfield, where Monty will be more of a hammer, while Gibbs could be used all over the formation, and maybe only touch the ball around 12 times per game, but all of those will matter. Just the idea of Brett Holmes being willing to pick him at 6 is wild to me, especially considering that freaking Bijan Robinson was still on the board. And like I said, the Lions surprised us again when he followed it up with the first and only off-ball linebacker off the board for like another 50 picks in Jack Campbell, who was my top-ranked guy at the position, and I thought was worth a late first-round selection, but 18 is a little early for me even. You love the size at 6'5", 245 pounds to legitimately be able to stack and shed offensive linemen in the run game, but this guy also had elite testing numbers in the agility drills in order to be able to work around trash, and you see it be an asset in coverage as well, sinking underneath routes and making it challenging for quarterbacks to lob passes over his outstretched arms. Does a nice job of tracking the outside of the quarterback as well. Not somebody who will just shoot through gaps or random plays from the backside a whole lot. Plus I don't want to see him be flexed out into the slot and cover receivers a whole lot, but definitely a 3-down player who will start right away. After Detroit hit on Malcolm Rodriguez as a late round pick last year and did re-sign Alex Anzalone in a pretty significant deal as we watched that battle unfold, I think you don't invest a ton of capital to take it slow with this guy, and there's no reason you should have to based on what I saw. Second round they come back and get a tight end, but while Notre Dame's Michael Mayer was still available, they went with Sam Laporta from Iowa instead. Not your typical Iowa tight end who plays in line constantly and is just going to do the dirty work. He has experience with a variety of assignments as a blocker, but almost more like an H-back or wing who latches onto guys on the move with good positioning and leg drive, has the route running expertise to defeat man coverage consistently and take advantage of soft spots in zone, plus then is a yak specialist with good burst, a sneaky wiggle to him, and willing to churn for contact. I don't think he has the explosiveness to really threaten the seams. He's dropped a few passes outside his frame, in parts due to taking his eyes off the ball early, and he's not the same type of combat catch guy that Mayer or Dalton Kincaid were in his class, but he was insanely productive for an Iowa offense where those Big Ten opponents knew every week that he was the one guy that they really needed to slow down, yet they just couldn't. I like Brock Wright, and especially James Mitchell as a number 2 option at that spot, but this is a legit difference maker, who I had in that range and will be an instrumental cog to that offense. Detroit got back pick 159 for former number 3 overall pick Jeffrey Okudah, and that's what they used to move up 3 spots from their other second rounder for another defensive back in Alabama's Brian Branch, which, as much as I love Branch, is a wild thought, just a player that you invested so much into, ultimately worth just moving up 3 spots in the second round. But as for Branch, he was my number 1 rated safety, and I think he can play deep, but he's best suited at nickel, which makes him and recently signed CJ Gardner-Johnson somewhat interchangeable. Hyper efficient in his footwork, being able to stick with guys out of the breaks, even when playing off, faster than he timed, and feisty at the catch point. In the run game, he's a mismatch against true slot receivers, where he can initiate contact and discard them, but also had the freedom to knife inside of blocks and create negative plays, with excellent instincts for when to shoot his shot. He's a bit undersized for handling those power slots that we see infiltrate the NFL, and you might not want to leave him on an island against true speedsters at the position, but he's ready to go week 1, and he's been incredibly reliable as a tackler, missing just 4 of 176 total attempts in his career with Alabama. In round 3, the Lions take a bit of a flyer on Tennessee quarterback Hendon Hooker, who was mocked in the first round quite a bit. I always thought this was mostly where he should have gone, because he is coming off a torn ACL of course, and will be 26 years old by the time he steps onto the field most likely. He's coming from an offensive system that is far removed from anything he'll be asked to do in the NFL, just reading out a 2-man concept to one side, and then having a deep option route the other way a lot of times. And right now, he scrambles to run rather than pass, which doesn't give him that cheat code early on as he learns the position. He does have prototype size and great arm strength, seems to be a very bright young man, and what you really like is the tremendous rate between big plays versus turnover-worthy ones, along with the slipperiness to get out of trouble. My problem here is that while I don't mind taking a stab at this point, why not try to move up for one of the top guys with that 6 overall selection, or maybe grab Will Levis at the end of the first round. I'm not sure about the vision here. And then we get to one of the most egregious overpays of this entire draft, not only because based on my and consensus boards, Broderick Martin was looked at as a 7th round prospect by itself, but then to go up to 96 by packaging picks 122, 139 and 168, considering the players that were available in that range, that's pretty massive. At 6'5", 335 pounds with 34.5-inch arms, Martin has elite size and length, and there are some dominant moments on tape of him just owning his space and tossing blockers to the side as the ball carrier gets there, but he's slow off the ball, lacks any type of quick twitch to get to the edges of guys in pass rush situations, and because of how tall he is, at Western Kentucky, when he had a larger workload, he really struggled to find leverage late in games. They already have Lynn McNeil there, who is one of the most underrated players in the NFL, so to probably get a backup here with everything they gave up is pretty crazy to me. Colby Sawstall, I also mentioned as a bit of a reach in my big draft recap, but I do like some things that he shows on tape. The one thing that you see over and over again is the grip strength to take edge defenders who are trying to stay square to him, dig them towards the outside hip, and then ride them down the line in wide zone. As a pass protector, he has a really quick first step, and then once he snatches up rushers, he typically doesn't allow them to escape anymore. His 10-yard split the pro day was horrendous, however, and he tends to dip his head into contact with guys on the second level. While as a pass protector, he tends to come in wide with that outside hand, and doesn't yet fully activate those hips as he's trying to anchor. He was expected to go undrafted, so a little early still, but the Lions didn't really have a true backup offensive tackle on the roster with quality experience, and this guy I believe can develop into a swing option. And then Antoine Green in the 7th, super easy with the way that he can roll or bend off either foot and create separations on slants and speed outs, along with showcasing outstanding ball tracking down the field. He does need to become more efficient with getting off press coverage and dictating in terms as a route runner, where his route manipulation and pacing needs some work, being able to accelerate out of breaks. I think he makes sense for a team that lacks some size and ball winners beyond Marvin Jones, who is now in his second stint with the team and into the later stages of his career. So all in all, Detroit did get some of the best football players in this draft. Gibbs was my RB2, Campbell my top ranked linebacker, Laporta my number 3 tight end, and Branch my top safety. Now, should a team with picks 6 and 18 come away with an undersized running back and more of an old school off-ball linebacker ultimately? Did they have a chance to find a long-term solution at quarterback? Or did they misevaluate themselves a little bit here, but it felt more like luxury moves to fill out the rest of the roster, rather than investing into high-value positions and taking the more optimal path to being a long-term contender? I think those are fair concerns, especially when you pair it with the quarterback at the top of the 3rd round, who won't play at all as a rookie most likely. I'm not sure that screams win now to me than after all, and nothing against the player, but I mentioned how ludicrous it was for what they gave up for Martin, a potential backup nose tackle. Definitely not my favorite approach to the draft, even though I do like a lot of the players. That brings us to the Green Bay Packers, the one team from this division that'll actually make a switch at quarterback, now that they traded away Aaron Rodgers, and part of the package with the Jets included them moving up 2 spots to pick 13 and getting pick 42 along with it. Altogether they made 13 selections, so let me just quickly run through them. With the 13th overall pick, Lucas Van Ness, edge defender Iowa, 2 second rounders, 42nd overall Luke Musgrave, tight end Oregon State, and 50th overall Jaden Reed, wide receiver Michigan State. 3rd round, 78th overall Tucker Kraft, tight end South Dakota State. 4th round, 116th overall Colby Wooden, the edge defender / interior defensive lineman out of Auburn. 2 5th rounders, Sean Clifford, quarterback Penn State, 149th overall, and then 10 picks later, Dontavian Wicks, the wide receiver out of Virginia. 2 6th rounders, 179th overall, Kyle Brooks III, interior defensive lineman out of Bowling Green, and 207th overall, Anders Carlson, the kicker out of Auburn. And then 4 more guys in the 7th round, Carrington Valentine, the cornerback out of Kentucky, Lou Nichols III, running back out of Central Michigan, Anthony Johnson Jr., the safety out of Iowa State, and Grant DuBose, the wide receiver out of Charlotte. There was a lot of speculations on if the Packers might alter their ways and give Jordan Love an offensive weapon here as he starts his path. But no, they went with another big athletic edge defender in Van Ness, a player who famously didn't start at Iowa because of the way that they treat the seniors there, but no doubt he was the best and most talented player along the front. Already a very impressive run defender with the pop in his hands, long arms and natural strength to stand up blockers, where you see him squeeze down lanes, but also rip through the reach of guys and create angles towards the ball for himself. Here's a line that I had in my draft profile on him. This kid plays like a bulldog foaming at the mouth, with that antsy ankle twitch as he's waiting for the ball to be snapped. In the pass game, at this point he's more of a one-trick pony, but it's one heck of a trick, just digging his hands into the chest of tackles, rolling his hips through and putting them on skates. He definitely needs to broaden his horizon and do a better job of rushing half the man, but if he can give a little stutter step and knife inside of blockers as they are trying to sit on his bull rush him regularly, I think he could be a real problem. That opposite of Rashawn Gary coming off either edge, with him and Preston Smith being in the last years of their deals. I mocked Clemson's Miles Murphy to them, who kind of had neck and neck with Van Ness, maybe a couple of spots early, but I'm fine with it. Then I want to group those 2 tight ends Green Bay took in rounds 2 and 3 together, before I get back to the guys selected in between those. I actually prefer Kraft straight up over Musgrave, but it's an interesting combination of different skill sets. The Musgrave selection in a vacuum was confusing to me, because as I tweeted out, These guys barely want to select receivers below 6'2", who don't actually block well, and this guy to me is almost a pure seam and cross runner, legit juice to run away from safeties, can create good separation with button hooks and curls, and really plucks the ball out of the air. But while his initial approach is good, and he's found more joy in being a blocker, he lacks the physicality and strength to sustain those, while not having run a broad route tree yet. Kraft, on the other hand, was more powerful than a lot of the defenders that he was responsible for in college, and got away with not positioning himself perfectly at times as a blocker, but you love the ability to snatch up bodies in space, and the finishing mentality in that regard. He doesn't have that speed that Musgrave has to really threaten defenses on the vertical plane, but he can win on all three levels, swallows the ball with those large mids, and then he just rumbles through would-be tacklers with an active off-arm to keep defenders away from his lower body. Other than those two guys, the Packers really only had Josiah DeGuara on the roster, who is more of an H-back that they brought along with Jordan Love a couple of years ago in the draft, but has combined for less than 400 yards through 3 seasons. I think this makes for an interesting way of complementing pieces, where Musgrave can almost be an Al Nazar replacement as a big slot, and Kraft is the guy asked to execute sift blocks and split zone, and then leak into the flats when they boot off those. Now, getting back to Jaden Reed, he was also a surprising selection to some degree, because they typically don't target these smaller receivers like Reed at 5'11", 185 pounds. No delay at all coming off the ball, and eats up so much ground with those first few steps, consistently putting defensive backs on the heels. Can also stop the momentum with little excess movement, and then add in deceptive hezzy steps off that in order to make opponents just freeze for a split second so he can blow by them. Slot fades in particular he was a tough cover on. He can get more efficient with the way that he approaches the ball, sometimes leaving his feet unnecessarily, or cradling it when he should really extend. And you want to see him just get downhill after the catch more so, but he has the speed when he catches an in-cut to get all the way across the field and take it up the sideline, and Michigan State already put the ball in his hands in a multitude of ways, so I'd expect this to be a weapon for Matt LaFleur on fly sweeps, and arounds, and then his eye candy off that stuff, in order to put defenders in conflict and make the run game tougher to deal with as well. Plus they lost their top 3 guys in terms of snaps taking the slot, so this is more so in the mold of a young Randall Cobb. They free to go with Colby Wooden, who brings an interesting and almost a little weird skill set, because he has snaps of overpowering guards and being a disruptive player in the run game, and then other times he gets washed on by tight ends on down blocks when offenses try to go outside of him. Super active, heavy hands, doesn't mind banging into bodies, largely relies on power as a pass rusher as well, but flashes a promising club swim combo, and is able to free himself late quite regularly with those long arms. Not the greatest lateral agility, however, and just too many wasted rush reps, where he gets tangled up with blockers and then spins off at some point. I'm interested if they see him as another one of those oversized edge defenders, or do they maybe use him as more of a slasher, asking to spike across the face of blockers and set up games on passing downs. That's more so what I envisioned him being on tape. The one pick that is just mind-boggling to me, and anybody who's watched Penn State football the last few years, is Sean Clifford as a top 150 pick. He does have some desirable qualities for the position, in terms of a strong arm to test tight windows, some good throws on the run, and the toughness that he's showcased over and over again at Penn State. But his accuracy, timing, and decision making can be absolutely wild. He was outside my top 20 names at the position, and he was the 11th one off the board, ahead of guys like BYU's Jaron Hall and Stanford's Tanner McKee, who were considered to have a chance to slip into day 2 potentially. Like I said in my draft recap, Lance Zierlein, who does all the NFL.com draft profiles, did evals on 500 players, and this guy was tied for 499th. So not somebody I want to spend a top 150 pick on once again. Wicks in the 5th is somebody who I liked a lot better in 2021, as a guy who can win on a vertical plane as an outside receiver, with some awesome releases, and ability to work on different footwork to create separation all in the route, with the play strength along with it to play for jersey tugs and win those contested catchers. But running a 4.62 was rough to see, whether it's those flowing passes or just hitting the footsteps of safeties. You see him lose focus at times, and he wasn't nearly as effective at hauling in those 50-50 balls this past season. Much more in the mold of what I imagined a Green Bay receiver though, and I think he was a little banged up last year, so hoping he can give them some quality snaps going forward as a number 4. Pick 179 they got back from the Bucks, moving back 2 spots in the second round, which is really cool now because Kyle Brooks should not have fallen this far. Another intriguing profile as somebody who legitimately played on the edge as a 300-pounder. When he did line up inside at times at Bowling Green and during Senior Bowl week, his get-off at that size is impressive, and he can be slippery trying to put hands on. Packs a nasty 2-handed swipe move, and is able to corner his rushers through contact. I thought he might fall a little bit, because he's more of a tweener who wasn't really asked to just stack and shed in the run game, and overall you'd like to see him keep his own chest clean as a pass rusher, but super productive in college already, somewhat playing out of position. So once again, do we maybe see a little bit of a shift in terms of the front dynamics in Green Bay, trying to create more disruption? I can't speak on the kicker unfortunately, other than his brother has been awesome for the Raiders and he made some big kick for Auburn. I didn't watch Valentine, and I'll keep it short on Lil Nichols here. Urgently approaches the line of scrimmage, can incorporate solid shifts to his running path with a strong will have to keep himself alive as a runner, but misses some cutback opportunities, not the most natural pass catcher, and usually blitzes slip off him quite regularly, so I see him as more of a practice squad candidate. I do really like the two other 7th rounders however. Anthony Johnson Jr. was my 10th ranked safety, very solidly built player who transitioned from corner a year ago and looks super comfortable in off man, with good route anticipation and 32-inch arms to help him crowd the catch point. You can tell that he's still learning position at times with the way he manages space in zone and angles from depth, but charges up the alley with no regard for his body, and has shown that he's a quick learner with a lot of experience covering kicks. While Grant DuBose lacks a speed element and tends to clap at the ball at times to some degree or take his eyes off it prematurely, but already has a pretty diverse release package, can violently drop his hips and snap off routes after stepping on a DB's toes, along with showcasing great awareness for defenders around him and the quicks to navigate around bodies after the catch. So looking at this class as a whole, it's in line with the way that they've handled the business in the past, but also some glimpses of bringing in different elements. The Clifford pick in the 5th round truly is inexcusable to me, and they brought in some weird player profiles where I'm not totally sure about where they'll play those guys, but I think they got some great value late, replenished with a bunch of bodies on the defensive front, and added plenty of weaponry for Jordan Love to take over a quarterback. I'll be interested to see how quickly he can find success, and then what the next offseason could look like for them depending on that, and if Joe Barrett, defensive coordinator, maybe shows some flexibility, because I'm not even 100% sure how to maximize the pieces that they brought in, now without going too far away from the scheme, and he's been a bit stubborn with his principles in the past. The final team for today is the Minnesota Vikings, a much smaller class with 6 names here. 1st round, 23rd overall, Jordan Addison, wide receiver USC. 3rd round, 102nd overall, also from USC, Mekhi Blackman, the cornerback. Then 2 LSU guys next in the 4th and 5th round respectively. 134th overall, Jay Ward, the safety / cornerback. And 141st overall, Jacqueline Roy, the interior defensive lineman. 5th round, 164th overall, Jaron Hall, quarterback out of BYU. And finally, 7th round, 222nd overall, Dwayne McBride, running back out of UAB. A much smaller class, thankfully for me, than the division foes, and something I tweeted out a couple of days after the draft, considering they drafted 2 USC guys, then 2 LSU guys, plus 1 guy from BYU and UAB each, is not only funny because they're all 3-letter programs, but all those teams actually played each other at least once over the last 2 years. My theory kind of got blown up when I realized that Jordan Addison at the top obviously was a Pitt in 2021 still, but I won't let that discourage me. As for Addison, it was an interesting discussion for Quentin Johnson and him, maybe for wide receiver 3, but I think getting him as the 4th off the board, all in consecutive order actually, and what he can be for Minnesota is great for them. The most savvy route runner of the class, I think he turned himself into this guy who will just get open within the structure of an offense, rather than giving him those designated touches that he still got at Pitt. Running a 4.49 at 173 pounds isn't great, and he's pretty unproven against press coverage, but he quickly gets up to full speed, excels at detecting the blind spots of defenders, and throwing in trigger steps to get them turned the wrong way. Makes a lot of challenging catches look easy by slowing down the pace of the ball with his fingertips, much more effective at positioning himself to haul in passes through contact than you'd expect, and has great start-stop quickness after the catch. With his route running prowess, next to Justin Jefferson as the number 2, who can punish one-on-one coverage, I think he could have a really productive rookie season, and this makes things easier for everybody else on that offense, especially after letting Adam Thielen walk. Then they didn't pick until the 2nd to last selection of day 2, where they took another rather slender guy from USC, in Mekhi Blackman at corner, but this guy has super light feet, utilizes his length accordingly, and is able to play sticky coverage across the field. The way he tracks and high points the ball down the field reminds him more of a wide receiver, and his coverage numbers last season were elite among college corners. He also takes care of his assignments in the run game, and missed just 2 of 68 tackling attempts this past season. His issues are, as you expect, being able to redirect quickly and off coverage with the lanky build, guys being able to push him around a bit, and he heavily relied on stack coverage against vertical routes, where he then doesn't have the physicality to fight back and contest throws to the back shoulder. Looking at the corner room for Minnesota, Byron Murphy being signed as the likely starter in the slot is great, but otherwise you're looking at a bunch of young guys who haven't really shown anything in the NFL yet, so at least adding competition and seeing which guys can acclimate themselves the quickest will be key. And ultimately, I believe Blackman and Roof Jr. start outside there, at least in nickel packages. As for the two LSU guys, Ward definitely going a bit earlier than I expected, was described as the glue of the LSU defense, and the guy everybody listened to in Baton Rouge. Long arms, kind of lined up all over the secondary, but probably best suited in the slot, where his lanky limbs and explosion to drive and breaks can really shine. Somebody you can deploy against tight ends with a tone-setting mentality to also deal with those guys in the run game, actively initiating the contact, but also being able to elude it when necessary. His problem is just unnecessarily often getting grabby during the route development, and he missed an insane 21.8% of his tackling attempts throughout his career. Allows his base to get too narrow, doesn't calm his feet and ends up lunging too much. They've got a bunch of young safety there as well, and just signed Murphy as a free agent like I mentioned, so Ward is probably more so a depth piece, and somebody they can maybe throw out there in big nickel sets. Jacqueline Roy on the other hand, I could have actually seen go a little earlier. Dude has some pretty freakish natural strength, with a chunky lower half to control his space, and toss big man off himself. I like him best as more of a penetrating shaped nose, but you see the contact balance to stay upright when getting bumped from the side. His power is also his calling card in the pass game, where he can stab at the chest of blockers, packs a forceful rip, and is able to create torque with his initial club. He just needs to learn to follow up with the opposite arm, and at this point he lacks a refined rush plan or counter moves that he can really throw out there. As a run defender, he can certainly improve his ability to counter the steps of blockers and disengaging in order to create negative plays. I'm interested in what exactly this Vikings D-line will look like, because they have some big bodies for more of a traditional 3-4 front, but just signed Murphy as I said, and will switch to even looks in nickel. I don't love Roy having to 2-gap over the center possibly, but the force he brings to just attacking the A-gap when they bring extra bodies and pressures, I think you could see the field more on passing downs early on at least, potentially. Jaron Hall towards the end of the 5th is certainly a bit later than I expected, especially as the quarterback 12. I think the kid has some starter traits, shows good mechanics to get the ball out on time. I really like how he can drive the ball just as he hits the top of his drop, but also throw with touch. Shows the light feet dovetail around pressure points and slide back up to refine his platform, but what's really impressive is the way that he can deliver the ball with different trajectories on the move. You can tell he does let being 6 foot tall affect his release point at times, and he overshoots his targets. He tends to stare on his receivers at times, and his feel for rushers closing in on him is lacking on other occasions. But his arm talent combined with what he can bring, picking up key first downs with his legs, there's a lot to work with here. As somebody, they can stash bank Kirk Cousins and give themselves options when they do want to move on from him maybe. Finally, Dwayne McBride in the 7th is where I kind of always saw him. There were people out there who had him as like a top 8 running back, and I just could not understand why. I get that he's fun to watch, with the short area explosiveness, ability to reduce his surface area, and chuck through wraps, but he just doesn't run the ball with different pacing, being able to cut down a strike length on the move, and then he has 5 freaking career receptions, and averaged a minuscule 0.14 yards per route run last season. He's a non-factor in the pass game, and I'm not sure I want him on anything but the zone-based rushing attack. Unless the Vikes trade away Dalvin Cook, they just resigned Alexander Madison, drafted Ty Chandler on day 3 last year, and then Kenan Nwangu the year prior, who handles kick returns for them. Tough for me to see him make that roster, to be honest. They also signed Ivan Pace Jr. from Cincinnati as an undrafted free agent, by the way, who I had as a top 10 linebacker his entire class. You can read up on that in my latest written piece at Footballtalk.com if you want. Looking at this Vikings draft in comparison to the rest of the division, they seem to go by consensus boards and try to find value more so than others, outside of the Jay Watt selection. And I'm not going to act like different analysts and scouting pages know more how to evaluate these players than NFL teams, but generally speaking, the public, so to speak, gets things right pretty well, and going by those boards proves to be a valuable strategy. Addison could be a wonderful number 2 to Jefferson, and an immediate upgrade over what Adam Thielen was at this stage of his career. Blackman could easily be a week 1 starter in the outside corner, especially with how the other youngsters have gotten banged up. Those 2 LSU guys are probably more so rotational pieces early on, and McBride, I will have a tough time seeing making it through final roster cuts, but I definitely like the Hall selection that late, with Nick Mullins being a quality backup. This guy can learn for a while, and you just see what they can possibly develop him into. The Vikings are in a bit of an odd spot, because they won so many one-score games last season, and I expect to compete at a similar level again this year, but I also see them making a bit of a soft reset. I think this draft aligns with both paths. Now let's look at this division as a whole and how they stack up against each other. I put the Vikings at the top because, as I mentioned, they got the best value out of the draft capital in accordance to my personal and consensus boards. They got some pieces that can help them right away, but also in the long run, whilst addressing mostly high value positions. Addison has a chance to be a 1,000 yard receiver, or at least close to it as a rookie. Blackman could be a starter on the outside from week 1, and in a draft full of mid-round quarterbacks, they got one of my favorite ones late in the 5th round. I put the Packers at number 2, which kind of tells you I don't love what this division did generally, because they kind of reached on some guys. In particular, Sean Clifford is still a shocker to me. They added a bunch of pieces to the skill position group, which makes sense in terms of how they could fit into the offense around the young quarterback, along with a bunch of guys being added to the defensive front. Although I'm not totally sure how they'll deploy them. Unless a guy I talked about liking from the 7th round turns into a starter, I do see a legit hole at safety though, a position they would have been able to address earlier. Number 3 I have the Lions, who once again, I like a lot of the players that they picked in a vacuum, with several of them high in my positional rankings. But you have picked 6 and 18 and you come away with the number 2 running back and the only off-ball linebacker selected in the first 2 rounds. The analytics community nearly had a heart attack. I talked about the move up late on day 2 and how much I hate what they gave up for a player that I looked at as a late round target. And I think they may be misjudging where they are a little bit, but it will be a group that plays a lot for them, at least in terms of the top 4 names. Finally, I have Chicago at the bottom. They still have a chance to move all the way to the top instead, if they can take advantage of the extra draft capital that they got back from Carolina and Philly for moving down from 1 all the way to 10. But the top 4 names were all categorized as reaches based on consensus boards. The 2 defensive tackles that they got within the top 64 picks certainly were early. I do think Donald Wright can be a stalwart on the right side of the O-line for decades, and I like some of the things that they did on day 3, but especially the mid-portion of this draft is questionable to me. That's gonna do it though for the first episode of the divisional draft and roster breakdown series. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel for more of these, and if you could maybe share it with a fan of one of these teams, I'd really appreciate that. Like I said, the plan for the next month is to release 2 divisions a week. If you have any thoughts on them, I'd love to hear those in the comments. Next up is the AFC North, as we just go back and forth between conferences. Make sure to tune in. So until then, see you later. Peace!